have the guts to play for blood?
I'm your huckleberry. That's just my game.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have Jacob Berman from History Valley. I didn't have it pulled up yet, but I want to share his YouTube channel with you. If you haven't subscribed, be sure to do so. I hear he gives away Gnosis and True Salvation with an occasional indulgence, but nonetheless free. So be sure to go subscribe, check him out, get your education. Look, I gotta mention, Jacob has interviewed more academics than we have at MythVision, wider scholarship in many ways than we have here at MythVision. So if you're interested in a episode, and I would say this is a pro, where the host doesn't get in the way of the academic like me, who can't help himself but want to have a dialogue and not just, have the scholar kind of lecture and explain their position. Jacob is good for that. If I annoy you, if for some reason you don't want to hear me, that's the channel you want to go to, because you know me, Jacob. I'm like, hold on. I need to know more, and I'm wanting to have these conversations. So, welcome back to MythVision, brother.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me. You were here in person 5-6 months ago. We did some recordings. I'm throwing a number up there, and one of those was something we haven't made public yet. That was traveling back and kind of looking for the development of Yahweh and where the God before the God before the God before the God comes from. Who are they? And why would we attribute Yahweh and Baal or Bel as one and the same deity, when most scholars would say, look, this was a distinct deity. Oftentimes they would say he comes from the south, who ends up usurping El's throne, takes his wife, Asherah. Pretty much he's a foreign god that ends up absorbing all the qualities of the deities that were local and native to this region and to these people of this particular region. So there are different hypotheses. In fact, I just ordered this and it's out. I took a picture recently. Giovanni Garbini, History and Ideology in Ancient Israel, where he actually thinks that Yahweh shows up in the Ugaritic Bel cycle, where El literally says, my son's name is Yah, and he identifies that as Yahweh. He also uses Porphyry's mention in Eusebius to kind of solidify that even into the Common Era, they're still calling their deity Yahweh, the same deity that's from the Phoenician Baal cycle at Ugarit and stuff like that. So anyway, enough from me. Jacob, you have something you want to share with us.
Yes. And before we get into the slides, it has to do with, we're not going to be able to go through all the exact parallels in exactly the way I would intend it in a full-scale documentary that I do need to make. But we'll go through enough of them where people will get a pretty good idea what's going on here. First off, I'll just start by saying that there are multiple deities in canon called Baal. There are several of them.
Right.
But then you have Baal Hammon. That's not a god I want to spend too much time on. I don't even really have any slides dedicated to Baal Hammon. But the point there is that in Carthage in North Africa, Baal Hammon worship had to do with practicing infant sacrifice. And this is the deity that seems to remind me of the biblical Baal and Moloch a bit more than Baal Hadad does, because Baal Hadad is a different god. I think he's a different god, and Baal Hadad is much more similar to Yahweh. He slays the serpent, and the other thing that's very interesting is there's a reference to 7 years, where after a period of 7 years and Mot's defeated, something like that. I remember reading Robert Price on this, talking about Baal Hadad going into a bog for 7 years. And so the number 7 is associated with Baal Hadad, which is interesting because there are some people that go through the book of Genesis and try to say the Sabbath is about Chronos. The seventh day is Chronos. Like, no, not necessarily, because you can interpret it as really being derivative of Baal Hadad. It represents his story, his death and resurrection as well.
Wouldn't it be safe to say that Cronus likely also was inspired from Baal? That they both have a common ancestry, if that makes sense.
I mean, there are certainly parallels. I would look at it more like in the Hittite text, which in the Hittite text you had Alalu, who was overthrown by Anu, and then Anu is overthrown by Kumarbi, and then Kumarbi is overthrown by Tishub. Tishub is Ishkar. So when Kumarbi bites the genitals off of Anu, Anu says, "I've impregnated you now. You've become pregnant." And he's pregnant with Ulukumi, which is, let me correct myself. No, he's not pregnant with Ulukumi. I skipped a step there. So I'll get back to that. He was impregnated with Teshub. And Teshub bursts out of Kumarbi's skull. Where have we heard this before? In Greece, when Athena bursts out of Zeus's, bursts out of Zeus's skull. So what that tells me, this is what's interesting about this. What that tells me is, at one point here, they were copying myths from Kumarbi and transferring it to Zeus, which is to suggest that Zeus was intended to be Kumarbi. This is different because oftentimes they'll talk about Teshub being Zeus. That doesn't really make sense, though. The other issue is in Hesiod's theogony, it skips a step. What do I mean by that? Uranus is overthrown by Kronos, and then Kronos is overthrown by Zeus. But where's that fourth occasion? Where's the fourth time? Because in the Anatolian text, the Hittite text, there's 4 stages. You got one god overthrowing the other. It happens 4 times. In Greece, it's just 3 times. So they subtracted a step from that situation, and they created a myth to explain it. Zeus finds out that Metis is going to give birth to a child that will be superior to Zeus.
Right.
So that's how they explain it away. Zeus thwarts it by swallowing Metis, Kronos style, and the myth is averted, but instead he gives birth to Athena out of his skull. That tells me that if they continued the story, Ishkar, there would have been a more direct equivalent to Ishkar as Zeus's son. If they continued the story. That doesn't make sense of Zeus as Ishkar. That makes more sense if Zeus was originally intended to be Kumarbi. And that's why he plays the role of the skull birther.
Okay. Yeah, we took it into there real quick. Shout out Daniel Kyle, gifted 5 memberships on MythVision side and on a History Valley side. We really appreciate the support, Daniel, all the support we can get to continue doing what we're doing. So thank you, everybody. We really appreciate that. Thank you. So, okay. Baal and Yahweh are one and the same. There's this idea that I've actually talked to Niels Peter Lemke about this, and he thinks that, yes, they're one and the same. So rather than trying to explain Yahweh is this foreign deity that penetrates the Israelite religion, having to explain how a foreign god could infiltrate, and then not only infiltrate, but then usurp all of the pantheon to the top. If we looked at Marduk, for example, I don't think Marduk was an external foreign deity that then came in. I think he was birthed within the native region of that pantheon and then ends up at the top of Babylonian, mythology. So, what makes you think Baal and Yahweh are the same, or do you want to pull up the presentation and take us through some of the data?
Let's go through the slides.
Okay.
The slides are probably not completely perfect, but they'll give us a pretty close picture of what I'm talking about.
Let me remove the chat so that we could see.
Yeah.
Hold on. Let me where do you
But
go
I
to
will
do
say,
that at?
Yeah, Marduk is going to be very much involved in this discussion. And before that happens, I want to make it clear that I'm not asserting that Marduk is Ishkar. but there are definitely Babylonian stories where Marduk is taking over Ishkar's role. We'll get to that in the later parts of this series of slides. All right, so who is Ishkar? Well, basic stuff. Ishkar is a storm god. He's a god associated with agriculture, weather, and also capable of starting floods. I'll pull up the text for that later. There's a slide where that's mentioned. Now, James Anderson, Professor James Anderson, an expert in Near Eastern myths, he has this to say, and this is what I want to point out here. It talks about, he says at the top here, I have my mouse up at top so everybody can see where I'm reading. Ishkar was also used to denote Adad and other manifestations of the storm god, including Adu, Baal. That's important because I want to make it very clear. Notice that Adu, Baal is right there. Mm-hmm. So it's very clear. And again, look at over here in the middle where my mouse is. Yep. Adad, Hadad. So he is making it very, very clear that Ishkar and Baal Hadad are the same god. Very clear. It could not be clearer. So I want to get this out of the way so that way people understand that I'm not asserting that they're the same god. No, this isn't scholarship. This is agreed that they are the same god. So because throughout this discussion, I'm going to be referring to Ishkar as Teshub, Baal Hadad, and Adad. So that will happen, and that's why that's going on. Mm-hmm. Just to be very clear on this. And this god was worshipped like 3000, 2000 BCE and beyond. So this is like way before Yahweh enters the picture. Right. Way before. Now, Theodore J. Lewis has this to say about Ishkar, Adad, Hadad, right there, where the arrow is pointing. And again, I'm using Theodore J. Lewis again to prove my point that it is widely accepted in scholarship that is exactly the same god.
Gotcha.
We'll move on to the next slide. Now, this is where things get interesting. I know on the bottom here that Yahweh causes the great flood in the book of Genesis. We see here it says, this is from Jennifer Pantoja. Their book's right here. So, when the Lord is raging, the heavens tremble. At Ishkar's wrath, the earth on its part also shakes. The great mountains are all thrown down. Decked with August's fearful splendor, who with his whoop herds together the thick rain clouds. Now it continues to go on, and it talks about how he's causing he can cause massive floods. You talk about the Ishkar's wrath and the earth, and he's capable of launching massive rainstorms, all that kind of stuff. So again, this is where Yahweh causes a great flood in the book of Genesis, and we see this in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, I don't have that up on the screen, but in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Adad causes a flood himself. I think it's that Enlil's order in the Epic of Gilgamesh because it's a variant of the Sumerian flood myth, but it is Ishkar himself that is doing it. So it's kind of combining Ishkar's power with Enlil's power and making Enlil command Ishkar. But Ishkar on his own can cause massive floods, death, and destruction. That's my whole point here. Now, this is something that's very interesting because we see here, this is from J. Edward Wright, The Early History of Heaven. He notes a myth, a Mesopotamian myth that talks about Shamash and Adad brought him into their assembly. So they're taking Enmandaranka, a king of Sippar, and they're taking him to heaven. Remember, Adad, that's Ishkar. He's involved in taking Enmandaranka into heaven. And when we see in Genesis 5:24, Yahweh takes Enoch to heaven. I don't really need to say much more about that. These parallels are widely understood in scholarship. So the story, so Ishkar appears in the story as part of the pair. So Utu, who is Shamash, and Adad, who is Ishkar, are taking Enmandaranka into heaven, and Enmandaranka gets turned into Enoch in the book of Genesis. But the point that I'm making is we got patterns. So So Ishkar has the power to cause floods, and he's involved in taking people into heaven. So both of those things are true, are actual parallels. So let's just keep going. Now, this is from Sybil Scriptures and Scrolls from John Collins at 70, is edited by Joel Baden and others. And this is what they're saying here. Again, they're recognizing Shamash and Adad are taking Enmandaranka into heaven. Just to show everybody how widely these parallels are understood.
And just so people, are you going to be covering this? I don't want to give away some of your thunder, but Enmandaranki is in the Sumerian kings list. Are you going to be bringing that into this to kind of point all that out? Because I was going to say,
I'm not talking about the Sumerian kings list as really, but yes, he's in the Sumerian kings list. Yes,
it's worth noting he was the 7th king from the beginning of kingship before the flood.
Yes,
so and he plays a kind of a Noah Enochic role, so to speak.
Indeed,
in the flood myths of Mesopotamia. Okay,
and I want you to also note when I bring up the 7 years towards the end of the slides.
Mm-hmm.
Enmandaranki being the 7th king, the number 7. Let's keep the number 7 in our minds here as we keep going. So anyway, so we got Ishkar overthrows Enlil, and this comes from the Baal and Mot myth. And so what you got here is you have a situation where Baal sees the sons of Atharet right here. He smote the great ones with the broadsword. He smote the pounders of the sea with the mace. He dragged the yellow ones of Mot to the ground. Then did Baal sit upon the throne of his kingdom, on the cushion, on the seat of his dominion. The next slide I got Ishkar is Tishub. I'm going to read from this excerpt from the Song of Hedamu real quick. Why are you destroying mankind, says Ea. They will not give sacrifices to gods. They will not burn cedar and incense to you. If you destroy mankind, they will no longer worship the gods. No one will offer bread or libations to you any longer. Even Tishub, Kumeya's heroic king, will himself work the plow. Ea, the king of wisdom, said to Kumarbi, why are you, O Kumarbi, seeking to harm mankind? Does not the mortal take a grain heap, and do they not promptly offer it to you, Kumarbi? Does he make offering to you alone, Kumarbi, the father of the gods, joyfully in the midst of the temple? Kumarbi being called the father of the gods is one of the reasons why scholars think that Kumarbi and Enlil are the same god. Not all of them, because there are parts of the Song of Kumarbi where Kumarbi and Enlil are two different gods, and one's talking to the other.
Yeah.
But there are Canaanite texts. I don't have all that in front of my screen right now, but there are Canaanite texts that merge Kumarbi and El into the same god. Or no, not merge. That's the wrong way of putting it. They're understood to be the same god.
Got it.
And Alberto Green, he is noting that it is understood that Tishub is Adad, because he says here, the popularity of Adad among the Hurrians is also apparent in the Nusi text, which identified a Hurrian storm god Tishub with Adad. And there are many other scholars that understand that Tishub is basically Adad, or identified with Adad, at least in the ancient world. And Ian Rutherford talks about similarities, but also the stories of the Song of Hadamu and the Song of Ulukumi. So we see that Hadamu, an eel-like sea monster, child of Kumarbi, and a daughter of the sea god. Hadamu succumbs to being seduced by the sonic and visual charms of Tishub's sister, Suska, a motif that Noga Ayali Darshan has recently argued is borrowed from an earlier narrative of the storm god's conflict with the sea, which originated somewhere in the Levant. That makes sense to me, because it seems like to me that the Hittite text, because we're going to get to the 70 sons, we're going to discuss the 70 sons a bit more here pretty soon here. The 70 sons of Atharet are being positively put as Tishub's allies, which seems to be countering the Canaanite narrative that the 70 sons were slaughtered by Ishkar, or Baal Hadad as he's called over there. So we'll come back to that soon. Now, in the Song of Ulukumi, which provides us more information on the situation, the longest of the extant texts of free cuneiform tablets narrates a fervent conflict between the gods and a blind and deaf stone giant, Ulukumi, a son of Kumarbi. Now, just so everybody gets the background of that story, Kumarbi has intercourse of a mountain. And the mountain births Ulukumi, just so we know where he came from. Oh, and Ulukumi, whose name means destroy Kumia, that home of Tisub, is also described as a Tarpanala. Kumarbi has the infant Ulukumi planted on the shoulder of Baluri, a sort of Atlas figure, who supports the heaven and earth. The sun god sees him growing in the sea. It was standing like a shaft with the sea coming up to its knees, and reports to the gods who go to Mount Hazi to observe. They initially try having Saska seduce it again, but a great wave of the sea points out that this is futile. This motif clearly presupposes a song of Hadamu. Then the storm god and the gods drive their chariots against him, but they fail, and Habat, watching the battle, wonders whether her husband is dead. Eventually, Tazmisu advises Tisub to visit Ea in Apzua, the Mesopotamian Apsu, the subterranean waters. Ea in turn visits Abaluri and persuades the primeval gods to release the copper cutting tool in order to detach Ulukumi from the ground. This is the same tool that was originally used to separate earth and sky. Perhaps a hint at this episode closes the sequence. This is done. Ea is apparently shocked at seeing the dead in the underworld. When the text breaks off, we may be in the middle of the final battle. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because you're seeing that Ulukumi is getting involved. There's going to be a conflict between Ulukumi and Tisha. There's going to be a conflict between the two. We'll see more of that later. And you see that Ea is involved. And it has to do with assistance. This reminds us of the Enuma Elish. In the Enuma Elish, however, the roles are reversed. Ea is asking Marduk for help. But over here, Tisha, the storm god, is asking Ea for help. You see my point?
Yep.
So they have an agreement there that Ea is involved in the story, but the roles kind of get flipped.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I need to use the restroom real quick.
Yeah. I just saw the chat. Okay.
Yeah, it's cool. Do you want to hit some super? Do you have control, right? You should be able to. You do not.
I don't.
Okay. Do you want to?
I would need that enabled for that.
Yeah. How do you do that? Do you know how to do that?
You'd have to go to the StreamYard settings and invite me to have that control.
Oh, I don't even have a clue.
Yeah.
Here, just continue. It won't take me but a second. I'll be right back.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just keep going. Yeah. So now we're going to be talking about the 70 appearing in the Hittite text and the 70 appearing in the Ugaritic text. So just to be clear, this text here comes from this book, but I think I made that pretty clear where I placed them. Okay, so let's take a look at the Canaanite one first. Baal's relationship with the children of Aphrodite is rather rocky. Although he holds a feast for them, he eventually fights and defeats them. So the sons whom Baal slays in the West Semitic myth of El-Qunursa, attested in Hittite Hurrian. So Mark S. Smith and Wayne T. Petard are telling us that this is attested in the Hittites and Hurrian. So that means this helps reinforce the argument that I'm making, in the sense that this is what's going on here, is that the Hittites and Hurrians definitely knew about the story of Baal slaying the sons of El and Aphrodite. Okay, just to make this point really, really clear. And El-Qunursa is like another form of El. Now we come over here and we're told, then we read of Tesub ordering Tazmisu to prepare his war chariot and the two sacred bulls to haul it into battle. In this first confrontation, even with the support of 70 gods. Tesub is unsuccessful against the stone. So we see a similarity here. We got the West Semitic myth attested by the Hittites and Hurrians of the 70 sons of Aphret being slain, and it's also attested by the Canaanites. And over here, the 70 appear again. This time, Tesub and the 70 are cool with each other. But over here, that's not true. Baal, who is Tesub, slays them. You see? So that's the point that I want to make very clear. And again, Kumarbi has been identified with El in other text. All right, so we're moving on to the Marduk identity situation. Like I said earlier, there are similarities between Ea and Marduk in the way they handle things in Enuma Elish versus how things are handled in the Hittite text. Again, the roles are reversed, where Ea is asking Marduk for help, but Tishub asks Ea for help in the Hittite version. So again, the roles are being reversed about who's asking for whose help. Anyway, Samuel Noah Kramer and John Mayer, they're noting here in the myths of Enki, the crafty god, Ea appears. Well, actually, let me read over here first. The line of powerful male gods, Anu, Ea, and Marduk, each son in the image of the father, is much like Anu Kumarbi Tishub or Sky Chronos Zeus, but in Enuma Elish, the significant conflict is between the oldest gods and young gods, between the line of Anu, Ea, Marduk, the primordial pair. Now, we'll skip a little bit. We go down here. Apsu is killed by Ea and set as a foundation of Ea's temple city at Eridu. Tiamat split into two by Marduk and made to form the foundation of the cosmos. Ea appears in the Kumarbi stories. As we've seen, his role is not all that clear. However, because key portions of the text have been lost, he appears to aid in the birth of Tishub. Again, you see my point? So Tishub and Ea are connected, just as Ea and Marduk are connected over here. So it's not just me that's making these comparisons. It is in the part of the Kumarbi cycle in which Kumarbi plots against the gods that Ea's part is rather more clear. Kumarbi fashioned the strange creature, the stone Ulukumi, that grew mighty on the shoulder of the god Ubaluri. Once Ea knows the problem, he discovers a solution. The tool, like Hesiod's sickle, has separated earth and sky. It's there to separate the stone from its source of power. Once that is done, Tishub is able, it seems reasonable to conclude, to win a victory in battle over Ulukumi. The Hittite link is complicated not only because much of the text is broken, but because so many roles in the story seem to be doublets, such as has been suggested before in the case of Enuma Elish. If Ea were not himself a character in the story, one would be tempted to expect the following pattern. Now, I'm not going to go on from there with what these scholars were saying in there. Oh, hold on a second. I need to fix this. I don't know why. I'll put that back up in a second, but for some reason,
Okay.
oh, I see the problem.
Still cool images.
Yeah, they are.
Dragon slaying. It's always awesome to see that kind of stuff, though.
Let me put it back up. I got the images fixed. It was just a little bit. The bottom image was out of place there. All right, so on the bottom there, we got Tishub Ishkar slaying Ilyanka on his Song of Ilyanka. And then on the top, we got Yahweh slays Leviathan in the book of Isaiah, so that's the top right. In the top left, we got Marduk slaying Tiamat and the Enuma Elish. You look at the way that the serpent's depicted down the bottom here, where Ilyanka is like this wiggly serpent, and it's very close to how Marduk is depicted over here, slaying Tiamat. Now, what's interesting is we got Sharuma assisting Tishub is Ishkar, in defeating Ilyanka. And this reminds me of Michael helping God to defeat Satan. It's very similar. So Sharoma plays a very similar role to Michael. I just want to throw that in here. All right, so we're already getting to the point to where Ishkar as Tishub is going to overthrow Inlau El Kumarbi. And in Damkini's Bond by Wilford G. Lambert, he's translating this text. This is what this story has to say. I'll read this whole thing, so it's not too long. I mean, it's very short. Up to which one did they take out of the gate of Esumisa, gracious king, or did he turn it? She shouted a curse, but gloomy heart he released her bond, laid it on her neck. King of the gods, Marduk stood in the gate of her palace. For Damkini, whose bond you have released. The gods of Esumisa, Marbiti of the Apsu, conquered them altogether. And their Miss Inlail addressed Marbiti of the Apsu. You are Marbiti of the Apsu. You are a gracious king. Why do you conquer us as if we were evil? You see that? Mm-hmm. So Inlail is saying that they have been conquered by Marduk. And he's asking Marduk a question. Why did you conquer us as if we were evil? So let's keep going. The king of the gods, Marduk, opened his mouth to speak, addressing Inlail. Come consult with one another among your Anunnaki. With one accord, come to a common decision. Since you said, what have we done that Marbiti of the Apsu plans to defeat us as evil? Thereupon they spoke to Damkini. Let your bond, which you released and could not do up again, be shown to later gods, and let later people who would not know see it. All right, so Marduk is over here. To me, he's clearly playing the role of Ishkar as the one overthrowing Enlil. Because this is outside of the Enuma Elish. This is not part of the Enuma Elish. By the way, just to be clear, this is not the full text of Damkini's bond. This is just part of it. But even the whole text itself is relatively small. But there was no need to have the whole thing here. But this, what I do have here, should get the point across that Enlil has been conquered by Marduk, according to this text, along with other deities. Now, Marduk is playing the role of Ishkar. Now, there's a problem with the claim that could be made that Marduk is Ishkar, and that's something I do not think is correct. Because Marduk's name, I'll pull up a slide soon that will show this, is a son of Utu originally. It's even in his name. His name means son of Utu. So he wasn't originally Ea's son. He's been given these stories. He was a much lesser god originally, but he was given these stories. He was given the roles of Ishkar as Marduk became more popular during the Babylonian period, Neo-Babylonian period. And to my point, so CJ Chrysostomo tells us the description plays on the traditional writing of the name Marduk. Amar Utu, an interlingual phonetic analogy, procures Mar Utu, the son of the sun. See that? Son of the sun. That is the philological explanation, rather than reading the two signs as a compound with the reading Marduk. Understands the signs separately, reading Amar Utu, which would literally be calf of the sun. On the bottom here, Mari Utu, son of Sama, son of the gods. That's even in the Enuma Elish. That's a contradiction. He can't be both the son of Ea and the son of Utu at the same time. Come on. So what that indicates is, and there are scholars that have hypothesized this, and I think it's true, that Utu was originally the father of the god that became Marduk later. And when that happened, for some reason, Marduk's father gets swapped out with Ea as the dad instead, and then Marduk is given these stories of Ishkar. He's not just given the stories of Ishkar, he's given the stories of other deities too. So many other gods are having their roles transferred to Marduk. Even their names are transferred to Marduk, like their titles. Because Marduk is becoming like super powerful. It kind of reminds me of how Yahweh also goes through a similar situation. I mean, I do think Yahweh is mostly a copy of Ishkar, but Yahweh having a lot of titles is what I mean. It's very similar to Marduk in that respect. We're moving on to the Hyksos. So early 2nd millennium BCE to the mid 2nd millennium BCE, around that area. Donald B. Redford mentions the Egyptian storm god Seth was been introduced as a dynasty's god, with every reason to believe that he is actually the Syrian Canaanite storm god Hadad Baal Saphon, because a cylinder seal of his representation is known from. Okay, it breaks there, but this part of it is all I needed. I want people to understand that Baal and Seth were understood to be the same god by the Egyptians. Now, this is something that I'll come back to Baal being the major deity to Hyksos in a minute, but this is gonna break from that narrative real quick. Telepino is a son of Tishub, or Telepinus, as his author spells it. The son of Tishub is the god of Yoth, agriculture, and fertility. Occasionally, he would leave the area. His absence created numerous difficulties. The land would become blighted and famine would abound. Angry one day, he disappeared again. Finding him was imperative. Hanahanas, the queen of heaven, sent a bee to search for him. The bee found him asleep in a meadow and stung him. Now, that's interesting. So he's stung back to being awake. And this is like a nature, death, and resurrection story. So the god doesn't literally die and rise again, but the nature is dying and rising again because Telepino is going to sleep. He ran away. He was all mad and stuff like that. The queen sent. He was so infuriated that he destroyed everything around him. The queen sent an eagle to return him to her, with the assistance of beautiful young women. The goddess of healing, Kamrusapas, who brought along sesame and nectar. He was He was cleansed of his negativity. Then all good things were restored to earth, compared to the Ugarit Baal. See also Kamrusapas Marduk Tishub. That bottom note is pretty interesting. Okay, we're coming back to the Hyksos and the Baal situation. All right, so this is from Christopher B. Hayes, Wenamun's prophetic mission. And this is what he has to say about this situation. So he says here in the middle, where my mouse is, right here, after the Hyksos period, Baal Seth was mentioned. He knows he's putting Baal and Seth, he's same god, was mentioned less during the 18th dynasty. And this was after the Hyksos are gone. So he says here, after the Hyksos period, Baal Seth was mentioned less during the 18th dynasty. Manfred Bitek, another major Egyptologist on my channel, that came on my channel and mentioned that Baal was basically the chief god of the Hyksos, or he said something along those lines. But Baal was a major deity of the Hyksos. This is what he said. Manfred Bitek was involved in excavating Avaris. So just to make that very clear. So Manfred Bitek, a major Egyptologist, is also linking Baal to the Hyksos. Okay. I'll read from the bottom here. Even in the 21st and 22nd dynasties, Egyptians and Levantine states would have remembered when Egypt thundered in the person of Baal Seth, but no more, according to Zakar Baal. Baal now thunders for himself and for Byblos. His point is that Amun of Thebes is no longer powerful enough to rule without accepting Baal of Byblos. Now that's interesting. The way Amun is kind of getting kicked to the curb in favor of Baal. That reminds me so much of the situation of El and Baal. That's so similar. I don't think it's a coincidence. El and Amun are both king of the gods in their own pantheons too. I'm going to be doing a whole video later on about why I think Amun, the Egyptian god Amun, is, I think, a copy of Enlil, but I'm not going to get into that here. So now we got James K. Hoffmeyer and Akhenaten and the origins of monotheism. This is what he has to say about the connections between Baal and the Hyksos. Hyksos king adopted Seth for himself as Lord, and he refused to serve any god that was in the entire land except Seth. Now that's a very interesting statement. The Hyksos king would only worship Seth. And you're going to see very quickly that this reminds him of the Aten. The Aten, a god that later gets kind of turned into a monotheistic deity a few centuries after the Hyksos period is over with. But let's keep going. Seth, of course, was an Egyptian deity who corresponds to Baal of the Semitic world. Only Goldwasser recently explained that. The offense of the Hyksos is not that they worshipped Seth, but the fact that the Hyksos ruler did not worship any other god in the entire land except Seth. The use Akhenaten the use of the word except upwat, I'm probably mispronouncing that, is the same exclusionary word used by Akhenaten to describe Aten. Jan Osman.
So they were Baal exclusionist.
That's what it seems, yes. And this is the point that Manfred Bitek made a very similar point when I interviewed him on this on my channel. Jan Osman has suggested that behind the charge of heterodoxy, against the Hyksos were dislocated Armana reminiscence. The idea is that the bitter and recent memories of the Atenist heresy were unfairly equated with the Hyksos. Goldwasser, on the contrary, argues that the memory of the Hyksos religious practice was an authentic, not superimposed or artificially projected ideological affinity. The Armana king and the Hyksos king may have shared a genuine religious otherness. That makes some sense to me, because it's like that, like focusing on Baal exclusionary, that is so similar to how Akhenaten looked at the Aten. You can't help but wonder if there's a connection. All right, so now this is where we're going to get into the other very interesting stuff. Ishkar as the rider of the clouds. We'll go to the bottom here. This is from John McClellan, the ancient Near East, John L. McClellan. In keeping with the storm imagery, there is also a parallel between Yahweh and Baal in terms of their movement through the air. One of Baal's common titles in the Ugarit text is the rider of the clouds, which is often compared with Psalm 68:5. However, contrary to the NRSV's him who rides upon the clouds, the latter actually says the one who rides in the deserts, which fits the references to Yahweh coming from Sinai in verse 9 and 18. Nonetheless, the rain in verse 9 presumes the presence of the clouds. And since the difference between the Hebrew words for clouds and deserts is just one consonant, the psalmist may still have had Baal's title in mind. And several other scholars have noted one way or another there's a connection between Ishkar as a rider, Baal Hadad, who is Ishkar, as a rider of the clouds, and Yahweh. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they lifted that from Ishkar. Now this is a very big deal. This right here. I'm about to mention. What I'm about to show right here is one of the best evidence I have for the argument that Ishkar is Yahweh. You'll see I don't say that lightly. Just from John Day, Yahweh and the gods and goddesses of Canaan. I often hear all the time that Asherah is Yahweh's wife. Asherah is Yahweh's wife. Well, not all the Jews thought that. In the Elephantine papyri, they said it was Anat-Yahu. Let's look at the top here. Seems it seems indubitable that the goddess Anat. Indubitable. I don't know why I pronounce it like that.
Okay, I butchered it too.
Yeah, that the goddess Anat, in the form of Anat-Yahu, did function as Yahweh's wife among the Jews at Elephantine in the 5th century BCE. So Anat, who is Baal Hadad's wife, okay?
So it's another form of Asherah, but it's Anat. So again, it's
Anat-Yahu instead. But my point is, Anat-Yahu, and I'll give my opinion here. I do think Anat-Yahu was Baal's original wife, and Asherah was just the mother of Yahweh. And what happened was Asherah and other Jewish groups viewed Asherah as the wife instead. So I think there was a disagreement among which one of them was the wife. But I still find it significant that the Elephantine Jews said that Anat-Yahu is Yahweh's wife. That doesn't change. Okay. So the Elephantine Jews, okay, in Elephantine Egypt, and the Canaanites are talking about the same goddess. Anat is Baal Hadad's wife in the Baal cycle, who kills Mot, drags Mot's dead body out of the underworld, brings Baal back from the underworld and resurrects him. That Anat is Yahweh's wife in the Elephantine papyri.
This also closely, I don't know if you saw the documentary I did on Yahweh, the dying and rising God, but if they are technically shared, the deities are the same, Yahweh and Baal in some sense. Yeah. They have the same wife. They have the same attributes. They're riders on clouds, as you pointed out. Ishkar, Baal Hadad, Yahweh, you name it. Once you start seeing the fracture of various cults that are trying to, nope, we need to be at Jerusalem. Nope, we need to worship him like this. Nope, he shouldn't have a wife. All of that is when we start getting these Hosea passages that say,
don't call me Baal anymore, but call me Yishi, my husband.
Yes.
Yishi.
Don't call Yahweh Baali or Baal anymore. And then you have the Baal competition with Elijah, and we're going to get to that. Some of the super chats actually have some interesting questions related to this.
Right.
But this is an interesting thing. So the real debate, and we're not certain of, and Jacob's not saying he's certain, he's just persuaded, is that Yahweh and Baal were really one and the same deity. Whereas, the other perspective is that no matter what you do, you can't escape this. That Yahweh either absorbed an existing attributes to a deity that was already there, or was one and the same with this deity. Either way you shake it, one thing has to be true amongst these two things, it seems. Right?
Well, I think I'm almost done with the slides, but I want to respond to what you said and also to what you said earlier about Yah, son of El, in the Canaanite text. I am familiar with that text.
Yep.
I think, honestly, that's just Yam, the sea god.
That's what he says that in this book. He just disagrees.
Yeah, Yam was just one of Baal's enemies, and Yam gets defeated very quickly. And Yam, he does have some similarities of Yahweh, and I mean some. It's not much. But Baal significantly outnumbers the similarities to Yahweh than Yam does. And to me, the Baal Hadad to Yahweh identification is the one that explains Hosea. Why did Hosea feel it necessary to say we can't call him Baal anymore? Really? It's in Hosea 2:18 or Hosea 2:16, depending on which Bible you're reading. Right. But why did Hosea have the author of Hosea? Why did he feel it was necessary to say don't call him Baal anymore? The Yam theory doesn't explain that. The Baal Hadad theory, it explains it.
Well, he's saying, of course, Yam appears in these texts, but he is arguing. If I may share, go ahead and finish sharing yours, then I'll share my screen and show what he actually says on the page, so we have an understanding.
Okay, fair enough. So Yahweh versus Baal by Norman C. Hobble. Now, this is what he has to say about it. I got the arrow pointed over here so everybody can follow me. This is about the Sabbath, by the way. This is presumably a reference to the annual harvest. At the end of 7 years, Mot, who is also aggravated by Baal's assassination, Amat's half-brothers, challenges Baal to a duel. So you got the 7. We're coming back to number 7 again. There's a 7-year period. And Robert Price also talked about the 7 Baal being in a bog for 7 years. And so there's a situation where Baal is involved in something, and there's a 7-year period. When you go to the book of Genesis, we get, okay, so God makes everything in 6 days, then he goes to rest on the 7th day. So I think that this is about Baal Hadad and his conflicts with Mot, Baal's resurrection. That's what I think. That's why I think the Sabbath was derived from. I think it came from this, from this situation. This is a list of parallels I put together to conclude my slides. And most of this was covered. In fact, I think I'm pretty sure I covered each of these practically. So Ishkar is viewed as the son of Enlil. Yahweh was viewed as El's son. Ishkar slays the 70 sons of El and Aphirath. Yahweh is one of the 70 sons of El, and he defeats the so-called false gods. And what I mean by so-called false gods is that you don't have El.
You're breaking up. You're breaking up. Say that again.
Can you hear me?
Yep. You're good now.
I
think Yahweh was trying to defeat your audio just now. So
yeah. Was I talking about the 70 sons when I broke up?
Yeah, you're in Yahweh is one of the 70 sons of El. Okay. You said that, but then you were explaining what it means.
Okay. Yahweh is one of the 70 sons of El, and he defeats the so-called false gods. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, Yahweh doesn't defeat the 70 sons in one go. There's no story like that in the Hebrew Bible, but Yahweh, you know how he's going around and having his worshipers destroy idols, say, your God is false. That's kind of how he does it instead. So it's gradually happening where it's explained like, okay, Yahweh is going to humiliate the idols. And say that these are lifeless idols. So that's how he overthrows the gods. It's put differently to make the other gods seemingly not real, but which is ironic since the book of Exodus says that Yahweh is a jealous God. Well, that does indicate that at one point they were more than just idols in the minds of more ancient Jews. Ulukumi rebelled against Ishkar. Satan rebels against God. Ishkar was the chief god of Hyksos, the people that invaded Egypt and later left. Yahweh is credited with leading the Jews out of Egypt. Ishkar has a son that died and rose again named Telepino. Now, this parallels weaker to a degree because in Judaism, God doesn't have a son that died and rose again, obviously. But in Christianity, he does. It's Jesus. In Christianity, Jesus is Yahweh's son who died and rose again. Now, rather there's an exact connection there, I'm not sure. But it's a parallel worth noting that Ishkar had a son. And what I mean by died and rose again, just to be specific, is that when Telepino ran away, as I read earlier, he ran away and the bee woke him up and nature was brought back to life. That's what I mean. So it's not exactly the same as a typical death and resurrection. It was a death and resurrection involving nature and Telepino falling asleep, which also, by the way, sort of reminds me of the Sabbath in Genesis. Ishkar was referred to as Baal Hadad. Yahweh was referred to by the title Baal at one point in the book of Hosea. That's why I pointed that out. Ishkar slays a serpent. Yahweh slays a serpent. So, Ishkar slays Ilyanka. Baal slays Tanan. Yahweh slays Leviathan. You see the point. Ishkar took Immendaranka to heaven. Yahweh took Enoch to heaven. Ishkar's wife is Medemsa in the Sumerian text. Is in later texts referred to as Anat, the consort of Baal Hadad. Yahweh's wife in the Elephantine papyri is Anat-Yahu. She arose out of the ground after 7 years. Okay, the way I put that, I'm going to admit I probably made a mistake with the way I articulated that, but this has to do with Baal Hadad and the 7-year period and him fighting Mot. That's what that involves. Just to correct myself there, sort of, in case, because I don't have the exact text about the bog and the 7 years. That's why I'm putting it that way. So it might be an error there, but the parallel is still true regarding the 7 years regardless. Yahweh creates everything in 6 days and sleeps on the seventh day. Ishkar is referred to as the one who rides the clouds. Yahweh is referred to as the one who rides the clouds or rides something, but it's the same thing. It's what we're getting at from the story of Baal Hadad, who is Ishkar. Ishkar is credited with causing floods. Yahweh is credited with causing floods. That's the end of the parallel. There's actually more that I could have gone into than that, but this is many of the parallels. And to my mind, there's no deity in Mesopotamia that comes even close to having a list of parallels like this to Yahweh. Not even close. Even if I got rid of the Telepino things, that has to do with it sort of parallels to me the Sabbath, but it also parallels the Christian Jesus death and resurrection, sort of. Even if I knock that parallel off because it's kind of like a quasi parallel, the rest of the parallels are very powerful parallels, and there's more I could have gone into. I could have talked about Reciv and Deber. Reciv and Deber, if I'm remembering their names right, they were deities serving Ishkar, causing pestilence. And there's a passage in the Hebrew Bible where those names basically appear there, and they're doing the same thing at Yahweh's command. I don't have all that in front of me, but I'm like, wait a minute, you're telling me Ishkar and Yahweh's servants are the same? Before I close my argument, let me say that the entire Hebrew Bible fails to talk about Anat. And what I mean is it never speaks against Anat, ever. The entire Hebrew Bible does not speak a word against Anat, Baal Hadad's wife. It'll talk crap about the Asherah poles, as we all know, but it won't talk about Anat-Yahu in any bad way at all. Well, I just want to throw that in there. Okay. I conclude my argument.
Thank you, Jacob. Okay, I'm going to share my screen real quick here, just so that we understand what Giovanni Garbini is saying about y'all. So I think it might be worth. I almost want to come up here to point out the history behind this. Because he says, in this connection, let us look at the treatment received by some onomastic evidence, which the Old Testament itself provides favor of the existence of the cult of Yahweh outside the Israelite sphere. The Joshua in whose field the ark drawn by Philistine cows ended up. and he gives sources, was a Canaanite from Beth Shemesh, but it has not been difficult to attribute to him a more or less close Israelite descent. Then we meet a certain Joram, son of the king of Hamath, but self-styled philologist, amend the text to Hadaram, a name which contains the Aramaic divine name Hadad, following the example of the pious chronicler who had already taken his own steps to eliminate an inconvenient piece of evidence. Then, as for Jochebed, Moses' mother, no better expedient has been found than to affirm without producing any evident justification that in this name, the presence of the Hebrew divine name is quite uncertain. This assertion is all the more remarkable in that it is made by no less a scholar than Nath, who in the pages which he devotes to the presence of the divine name Yahweh in Hebrew nomenclature, in fact, proves more of a theologian than a linguist, and that's a jab at Nath. This is demonstrated clearly by the final words of his investigation, in which, having summarily liquidated the Amorite onomastica, and having also turned Yabibi, the Aramaean king of Hamath, known to us from the annals of Sargon II, into an Israelite, he calmly went on to say, thus, in no case is the name Yahweh to be encountered outside and independently of Israel. So the tradition of the book of Exodus could be right, namely, that the divine name Yahweh arose for the first time in Israel, or better, for the first time with the people of Israel, and therefore in some way goes back to the work of Moses. If this has been the fate of biblical evidence, it will not be difficult to imagine that reserved for the extra biblical evidence that the discoveries of text have produced, leaving aside the mention of Yahweh in the stele of Mesha because of the corruptness of the text. We have already noted Yabibi of Hamath. Then there are the Amorite onomastica of Mari and some other Syrian cities, which can be dated around the 18th century. We're talking the same time the Hyksos approximately are running around, which offer various attestations of the names compounded with Yahweh and Yahweh and Yah. Since this last element is taken as a hypochoristic suffix, it has long been quite certain that the nature of the word is verbal, and it is thus safeguarded from dangerous onomastic comparisons. From Knopf to W.F. Albright and to the latter's docile pupil H.B. Huffman, it has been the merit of A. Finnett, first in study dedicated to King Yahweh Elah, and then in a specific article to have demonstrated convincingly the formal identity between Yahweh, and the name of the Hebrew God. When a fragmentary text from Ugarit belonging to the mythological Baal cycle produced a verse in which the god El said, "The name of my son is Yah," many scholars hastened to correct the text to remove the mention of Yah. When the arbitrariness of this procedure was pointed out, they found different ways to deny the evidence. One was to see Yah as the usual verbal form interpreted in different ways. One was to suggest a phonetic variant of Yam, the Ugaritic god of the sea. Very few scholars follow Abby H. Cazeles in accepting the existence of the god Yah at Ugarit, even though he is a god who, moreover, continues to be attested in the area even in the next millennium, as Porphyry testifies in Eusebius' preparation of the Gospels, Preparatio Evangelica, when he asserts that the god Yah or Yeo, which is Yahweh, this is literally the same god in the same area that the Baal cycle was discovered a millennium later, was worshipped at Berytus. So this was something me and M. David Littler talked about. So just to point out, it's not, look, it could be a debate or a coin toss if you went, well, Yah here could mean Yam, or it could be Yahweh. And the fact that they had Mari text and stuff that are way older that carry the same phonetic attributions we find with Yahweh. But the fact that Porphyry, a millennium later, is literally saying through Eusebius's preparation of the gospel that the god Yahweh was worshipped at Berytus, that is the same God. That's Yahweh. And this God literally sacrifices his only begotten son. So this Phoenician counterpart, it parallels everything that this guy is saying, ultimately, that also is shared within Christian theology. So I just figure I would point that out. If you're interested in the book, you can buy the book. I think this is it here. History and Theology in Ancient Israel, Giovanni Garbini, and he goes on and on and on. So anyway, just figure I'd give his argument on what he's saying, and he's using the Porphyry Eusebius material, saying, hey, it's still in the record to the time of Eusebius that people are still worshiping the same God from the same region that we find in the Baal cycle, the same name. Anyway, it's an interesting observation. So thank you for your presentation, though. I guess maybe one question before we get to super chats, if that's cool with you, and that is, you're saying they're one and the same. You've heard the scholarship thinks that this is a deity that infiltrates and then ends up absorbing all of this stuff. Why would you not take that position instead of the one that you are taking?
Because it doesn't really explain to me the enormity of the parallels between Baal Hadad and Yahweh. And here's everything. Let me throw this out here. Why couldn't it be the reverse, that they gave Baal the title Yah? Why didn't they give him the name? It could be, one could posit the possibility that this was done to neutralize Yam, whom I think is the one being referred to as Yah, as an authority. Because there's no exact equivalent to Yam that shows up in the Hebrew Bible. Not that I remember at the moment. But the other thing is, Baal being the original, Baal Hadad being the original God that was later renamed Yahweh, is the explanation that explains Hosea better. Because in Hosea, it's telling us that Baal was what Yahweh was called back then. We're going to call him Ishi now. Don't call him Baal anymore. We got to get rid of that. And so there's an attempt to disassociate Yahweh from Baal. And if they were not originally the same God, then Hosea wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. And then there's the issue that this Yah character and older in these other inscriptions, I have heard of these inscriptions before, at least a lot of them. And they're not really, the name sounds like Yahweh. That's about it. There's not a whole lot of parallels. There's some parallels, but it's not a lot. And to me, the sources there are a little sketchy. It's not as concrete as the massive amount of parallels that exist between Ishkar and Yahweh. That's how I respond to that.
Okay, so then where would the name Yahweh come from, in your opinion?
I think they came up with a name for him, and they might have been inspired by the name of a different deity. I'm totally fine with that. To create a unique name, to try to create a unique name for their new version of Baal Hadad, to distinguish him from the other gods. They want to disassociate him from El and all these other gods in canon. And that's what I think they're trying to do. That's why in Hosea, it's saying, don't call me Baal anymore, call me Ishi now.
Yeah, but you could even go to Exodus, right? I think it's Exodus 6, where your ancestors knew me as El Shaddai, but my name is Yah, right? Yahweh. So
exactly.
Does that mean his name was El Shaddai? And then you see what I'm saying?
I could have shown links. I could have shown some links between Shaddai and Hadad, actually. Because some have pointed out that Shaddai and Hadad are very similar linguistically, and that would yet again connect Baal Hadad to Ishkar. I mean, of course he's Ishkar, but what I mean to say is Baal Hadad to Yahweh, because Hadad became Shaddai, and so he became God Almighty, El Shaddai. So that actually fits the Ishkar connection pretty well. Okay.
So there's a lot of interesting notes here. I wish we had access to interviewing you and I, being able to interview Giovanni Garbini, because he's passed away in 2017. He'd have been interesting to hear. Yeah, imagine what we could get him to like. All right, so here's my thoughts. You pitch your thoughts and then see what he has to say. I think we get to the Q&A if that's cool with you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Cool. Again, Daniel, shout out for literally membership gifting, MythVision and History Valley members.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, hopefully they'll maintain the memberships and we can keep on, because this is like definitely how we keep the lights on. Okay, Kevin, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Kevin Crawford, thanks for the super chat. Shua, Canaanite man. Bathshua, Yeshua is the same linguistic family.
That did not occur to me before. That's interesting. I'll have to look into that sometime.
Yeah, these aren't questions. A lot of these are just kind of
Statements.
Yeah. Again, thanks for the super chat. The Shamash candle in Jewish tradition is named after Shamash, reference the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgal, and Sumerian Kings List. Be mindful of Shamash. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep. Kevin again, onomastic symbolism for Shamash. Shama, Shamayim, Jehovah Shammah, Shamanism, Shimazu clan, Japan variation, etc. So now I'm thinking we need a philologist that we might be playing word games here in some sense and connecting dots. I don't know. I'm cautious and skeptical of making all these linguistic connections, but
agreed. Yeah.
Again, thank you for the super chat. More onomastic symbolism. Shamash's shamanism consort is ayahuasca.
It actually, this doesn't really have to do with the super chat, but that actually reminded me of something that I could have said earlier in response to the whole Yah is Yahweh thing, because some scholars have linked Iya to Yahweh instead. And what's interesting about that is that Iya helped Tishub in the Hittite myth. I went over that earlier. And you see, rather than this is part of my argument earlier that I was making, that Yahweh could have just been a name that Baal Hadad absorbed when he was becoming the god of the Bible, to eliminate the need of another deity to help him out in battle. It could have been part of that situation. I think there were probably multiple reasons why he was given that name. On top of that, to give him a name, and it probably changed the pronunciation a little bit of the name to make Yahweh's name as original as possible. Let's keep going with the super chats.
Awesome. Thank you again, Kevin. Mr. Monster for being a member for 36 months. Elijah, prophets versus Baal. Prophets who win. If I could skip one just to ask the super chat that Mr. Monster is getting at here. Thanks so much. I never understood the story of Elijah prophets versus Baal prophets, because it seems to me that one side cheated. Instead of pouring water, they poured oil. I don't recall there being, I thought there was just water, period. He poured 8 barrels.
Yeah. I'll make this point. The Baal Hadad is Yahweh theory explains Exodus better, because in Exodus you had the Jews, they fell back to bull worship. They built a calf. Moses comes down the mountain. He gets pissed off, like, what the hell are y'all doing? Because it seems like to me they were worshiping Yahweh with a bull, with an image of a bull. Well, which deity had that bull image? Ishkar. Ishkar was worshipped with bulls. He was associated with bulls, and that's what's going on. And they're switching from bull to lamb worship. But again, the Exodus doesn't say that they are worshiping a false god. They are worshiping Yahweh, but they are making an idol to Yahweh. And the book of Exodus doesn't even want Jews to make idols to Yahweh. Not even that. You can't even build idols to Yahweh. That's also taboo in the book of Exodus.
Interesting.
But that fits the Ishkar connection better than the Yam thing.
Gotcha. Solera Knight, thank you for the super chat. The Jewish translators replaced the unspeakable divine name Yahweh with titles Lord, Baal, and God. Greek translators didn't bother to rectify. Or did, this is a question they're asking.
I would say that not quite in the way you're saying it, Solera, but to a point, it's more like the reverse. And what I mean by that is, if you look in the book of Hosea, you look at the book of Exodus, the bull worship being earlier than the lamb sacrifice. You got that's definitely indicated, because they did sacrifice lambs supposedly when they were in Egypt during the 12 mythical plagues, but they fell back to bull worship because that's what they were normal. That's what they were used to doing. That's the Exodus is kind of giving us that impression. And Moses is like, no, back, get rid of that. We got to get back to lamb. Screw that crap. And we're going to go through hell now because y'all screwed up and built that damn image. So, and in Hosea, Baal Yahweh was referred to as Baal. So what it's telling me is that in the past he was called Baal. I think even before he was called Yahweh, because that to me makes sense of Hosea and Exodus to me better. So I think Baal's being replaced with Yahweh in the same way that Baal is being replaced with Yishi, my husband, in Hosea.
Thank you. Kevin Crawford again. Thank you so much for the. Oh, did I skip one? Oh no, I didn't. Okay, good. Kevin, thanks again so much for the support. Semitic languages are an Afro-Asiatic language. Nigeria to Sumeria, reference Genesis 10:6-20 for context, and Nigina, Shemash's daughter, composite Nigeria. I do think there's definitely hints to more African mythology and linguistic sources that need to be explored. It's something that I definitely have to dig into more, but I know there's got to be something there. There is something strangely confusing about Genesis 1-11, the entire chapter, including Abraham, where it seems like it's talking about Cush, right? Which is in Africa, Egyptian Cush. But then it hints at regions that are in Kish, Kish, which is over here near the Euphrates River, Mesopotamia. And so either the translators made a goof up or there's a mixing of different mythologies from different regions that are going on in Genesis. And that stuff interests me. So I definitely want to dig more into this. And I don't know much about this particular super chat, but I definitely think it may be related to what I'm trying to point out, that there's something going on and maybe they're in communication. Whoever the author of Genesis is knows there's some type of communication between Kish and Cush. But Kevin again, is Shamash, sun god, the biblical character Ham, Hama's son? No.
I'm not sure if that works, but I don't know.
If I were to look for any kind of parallel to this, my opinion would be looking at the Moses story, where his face shines like the sun because he sees God. And here you have kind of a Hammurabi scenario where Hammurabi's law codes from God. He sees the shining light of the deity seated on the throne on a mountain, that kind of thing. That would be the closest parallel I personally can come up with right now off the top of my head. Maybe Enoch's symbolism of being 365 days, being sun, a lunar or a solar calendar might have something to do with that. I'm guessing here, though. I am guessing. Daniel Kyle, thank you for the super chat. Asherah, Anat, Astarte, the three aspects of the goddess. Asherah is the mother, Anat the warrior, Astarte the maiden, mother, crone warrior.
I mean, sometimes they are expressed that way as a triple goddess. So, I mean, you got a little trinity going on there. Yeah. I don't think they were originally the same goddess. That's just a later conflation, but it is interesting.
Right. Thank you, Daniel. I imagine there's probably some conflation at times, but you do see their roles are different often in the myths.
Yeah.
And that's what you were highlighting too.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Kyle, again, become a member, support modern scholarship, $5 easy. Yeah, thank you so much, man.
That's right.
Absolutely. Crimson 90 member over at History Valley for 7 months. Ishkar equals Issachar. Interesting.
Yeah, I've that's something that's occurred to me before, but I'm not sure if there actually is a connection, but it is something to wonder about. It is definitely something to wonder about.
At least, is there some connection? Kind of like Samson's name and Shamash, right? That's another.
Right. Yeah.
There's something's going on there. It seems. Kevin, again, thanks for the super chat. Nigerim and Nigerim Hulgig, he who hates evil.
I don't know what that has to do with this discussion, but okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. Daniel Kyle, El is replaced by Yah. So is Baal replaced by Yah? Yahweh becomes the very nature of the Father and the Father. Christ becomes the Father of the Father's bosom, his very nature. Also see Isaiah passage.
I suppose it's a way of looking at it. What I'm saying is that Baal Hadad was given a new name. It's like a fresh new start. It's like somebody like basically faking their death and changing their identity, flying to another country, starting a whole new life. That's the analogy that I would give to what happened to Baal Hadad when he became Yahweh.
Yeah, there's a lot here. I mean, it's difficult to try and explain the theology of Christian origins, in my opinion, or Christianity itself, with early Iron Age, middle to late even Iron Age concepts. But there's some continuity, and then there's going to be discontinuity between how we are perceiving these things. Yeah, because when I see Jesus as the Father in the Father's bosom, if you read like the Dionysian Gospel with Dennis MacDonald, and you see the logos kind of theology with Philo of Alexandria and Plato and all that, something newer is happening in that theology versus the typical genealogical perception of the ancient gods. Their families, they have mothers and they have daughters and they have wives, and sometimes their wife is their sisters. I mean, that's how the old world used to rock in a lot of these myths. So what is the passage in Isaiah that you're alluding to, Daniel? Just so I try to cover that. Do you have any idea which passage specifically, or is it the one
I don't recall at the moment.
Okay. I'll try to keep a lookout, Daniel, and we'll move to the next one. I'll try to come back to it just to make sure I'm not leaving you hanging. Solera Knight, thank you for the super chat. One nation under God. Which God? Mammon? Thank you so much. I don't know where that
super chat's going. Yeah.
It's just being kind of funny, I think.
Yes, I thought.
S. Mill, thank you for the super chat. Baal equals Mediterranean coast storm god, and Yah equal desert storm god, and Set equals desert storm god. But Karakuni, only one I heard support Set Yah, though.
Yeah, I mean, that would make sense. That's kind of what I believe. I mean, yeah, Ishkar becomes Baal Hadad, he becomes Set. And so it's the same god. And even like I was going through scholarship earlier that the Egyptians recognized that Set was Baal Hadad. I mean, there are some very similar stories there between Set and Ishkar that I'm going to be getting into, and whenever I do the full documentary video about Ishkar, that'll definitely be hours long, because I'll be actually reading the passages, not just the scholarship, but where these texts parallel each other. That's going to take a lot of time. Yeah. I didn't do that here because we don't have that kind of time. Yes, Karakuni would be right, because you have a situation where Set versus Osiris is kind of similar to Baal versus Mot, but the roles are kind of flipped. But there are more to that. There is more to that story. Yeah, we also have this. You have depictions of Set being on Ra's boat. I don't have the picture in front of me right now. We have depictions of Set being on Ra's boat, and he's stabbing Apophis. It's very similar to how Ishkar is slaying the serpent. And Apophis is wiggly serpent. Wiggly serpent, just like Ilyanka.
And we know how fun serpents are in Egyptian mythology as well. Like, there's a lot of significance to this. Now, I'm not trying to be parallelomania, but sure. Someone asked, why does MythVision stray away from drawing Egyptian comparisons? If you feel that I have strayed away, I don't stray away from it. In fact, I think there's definitely going to be significant Egyptian comparisons. I mean, they ruled the area for over a millennium during the Bronze Age. And there are probably at times where they ruled the region even after into the Iron Age. But I don't stray. I would say this: I don't know their mythologies as well overall on making the connections, though I know some of their mythologies without a doubt have overlap. But I also see connections to Osiris and Dionysus and Jesus and Osiris. There's all sorts of stuff. So I don't stray away. And if you feel that way, you just probably got to stick around and watch my million videos and Jacob's million videos to see that we do this. We do have academics on that do it. It's easier under the Roman period, of course, to see Greco-Roman sources, but even then, Hellenized Egyptian sources were all over the place too for Christian origins as well.
Right.
So if that's the case, please don't think we're purposefully straying away from them. I hope to actually cover them in depth over time. Anyway, I just figured I'd address that while we're here because I know that you'll do the same. Did Daniel ever comment what he was talking about just with Isaiah? I didn't see it.
I know.
Okay, maybe he's not overly concerned about it. I just want to make sure I'm not leaving.
I think he did. It's the last super chat. It's the last one.
Oh, the last super chat. Sorry. We'll come back up to the other ones above. I just wanted to Isaiah 9:6, for unto us a child is born, a son is given, government shall be upon his shoulder, his name shall be Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. From what I understand, this is not in its original context in Isaiah, not meaning what Christian interpretation of it meant. Exactly. From what I understand, this is an actual king that they're expecting who has the titles that, are given to God, but he's supposed to rule the actual kingdom. Not that he is God or things like that. Because when I was a Christian, you read back, you're like, that's Jesus. He's the king who's being spoken about here in Isaiah 9:6. And you know how that goes. Do you have any comments on this, Jacob?
Nope.
Nope.
I don't.
Okay. I don't want to hog up all the air here. We did this one.
Yeah.
Okay. I think there's a lot to be said about Set and Yahweh. I loved what you brought up there. I never really noticed that with the Hyksos stuff, but I know that later Hellenistic authors did it. I thought it was just later Hellenistic authors that were comparing Yahweh and Set. This goes way back. You're saying with the Egyptian Hyksos.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very old.
Long history. Okay. Warlight, thank you for the super chat. Is Jesus equal Mithra, or did Jesus gain Mithra traits?
I don't really buy the Jesus Mithra connections. There probably might be a couple of real similarities, but unfortunately there was a lot of pseudo scholarship done on that, a lot of false parallels, especially zeitgeist nonsense between Mithra and Jesus. That kind of perverted the waters there and genuine attempts to show any connection between the two. So I have no comment on that.
I think there are definite parallels that you're going to find, but you'll find that because they are also commonly doing the same stuff.
That's my point. It's not, it's minute parallels. It's not major unique ones.
Yeah, I think there is a Mithras bull that has an inscription on it, but then again, you're going through loops to try and see there's parallels there. Yeah. And I can't remember. It's like Sanskrit. The wording on it is Sanskrit. But he's slaying the cosmic bull, but the cosmic bull is Dionysus. It is the same God that I would parallel with Jesus. So there are parallels. Whether Christianity looked to Mithraism and said, I'm going to imitate, I don't necessarily know. I don't know any way to prove that. I would just say they're all coming out of a similar stream of thought during a similar period. And one didn't necessarily have to look at the other's homework to write up their theology. I think it was just in the air at the time. And of course, maybe borrowing, but there's no way to prove it, I don't think. Warlight, thank you for the super chat again. Is Yahweh equals Baal, or did Ea La gain Baal's traits? Do you understand this?
Yeah, I was kind of talking about this earlier where, again, I think it's Baal Hadad, and he's, to a degree, he might be he's taking over titles and names of God, of other gods that are very similar. As that might sound like that, but again, it's the point that I'm making earlier is notice that the parallels. Yahweh is not a conflation of several gods, not completely. Most of his stories, or many of his major stories, are derived from Ishkar. That's what I was trying to show earlier. Mm-hmm. They're concentrated on Ishkar, so much so that to me, it's more than just imitation. There's something going on here. There's something very seriously going on here between Yahweh and Ishkar. And to me, just saying that, oh, Yahweh was Yam, a god that got defeated in the Baal cycle, is somehow him. That doesn't make sense to me. But if it's Baal Hadad, and if the Hebrew Bible is a continuity of the story of Baal slaying the 70 sons of El, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. By the way, the way you worded that made it sound like you think that maybe Giovanni Garbini is suggesting that Yahweh and Yam are the same. No, his argument is
Right.
that
I
Yah
get
is
that.
not Yam.
I get
That
that.
these other scholars are trying to say that my son is Yah. El saying that my son is Yah is Yam, because they don't want Yahweh in his argument to have been from the north. They demand that Yahweh came from the south, is his point, and he says every attempt, he just says, doesn't seem to make the best sense out of it. But your point, I think that whatever your position on that is irrelevant, because your point is like narratives that we do have between Baal Hadad and Yahweh are so similar, meaning Baal Hadad, Ishkar, they're so similar that you have to explain the data on either two principles. One, evolve to adapt these narratives, or two, they're really one and the same deity. And then they broke off with identifying one called Yahweh and identifying the others Baal Hadad. And so just making sure the new viewers who are popping in have an understanding of what you're trying to do.
Sure, and the Yahweh thing, there may be another explanation for it, because I'm not positive. I think there was a conflation involving Yahweh in during the Hyksos period, but I have to look into that further. I don't want to specify too much what that is yet.
Interesting. Yeah, let me know. Hey, we'll do a follow-up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
I love talking about this old stuff here. Daniel Kyle, Isaiah 9:6.
We already addressed this.
Okay. Avaros in the house. Thank you so much for the super chat. In Arabia, the highest god, Al-Ilah, was Hubal, probably Hu-Baal, whose symbol was crescent moon, which looks like bull horns. Any Hubal Yahweh link?
That's interesting. I would like to double check the Quran to make sure Hubal wasn't mentioned as a false god. But I have heard Hubal sounding like Baal before. That's not news to me. But to be on the safe side, I don't want to comment on that further right now.
So Avaros is a friend on Facebook. Avaros, write me if you have any sources or more interesting follow-up stuff. I'll send to Jacob, or I'll connect you with him. Either way. Thank you so much, brother. Yeah, Solera Knight again in the house. In Mammon we trust to pay for power
electricity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Solera. And then Doc Plurimonat, Kenite hypothesis. Moses meets Yahweh via Midianite cult. Israel's one God, just a southern Baal variant adopted by ex-Egyptian hill tribes.
Yeah, I don't buy that. Honestly, I thought the Kenite hypothesis, I am familiar with it. I thought it was really weak and seriously lacking in evidence. So I was not impressed with that argument. I was very underwhelmed. And quite frankly, it explains almost nothing about the narratives of Yahweh deriving from Baal Hadad. That theory doesn't address it. That doesn't even come close. So
Yeah, I wanted to give a shameless plug to my buddy here, Inquisitive Bible Reader. He's got a really cool YouTube channel as well, but he also has a blog, Is That in the Bible? And he brings up the Kenite hypothesis, of course, and meeting Yahweh again for the first time. Of course, there's some weird crap happening in Exodus, as we talked about earlier, where your ancestors knew me as El Shaddai, right? And what's weird is you go to Genesis and it literally actually has Yahweh talking with Seth and Enoch and Abraham. So it makes no narrative sense that Exodus would say your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they knew me as El Shaddai. Well, that's weird, because when you read in Genesis where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are communicating with God, he's called Yahweh. So what the heck's going on here? But there's a lot of interesting like Midianite connection stuff he goes into. Yahweh elsewhere in the Bible, Seir, Mount Paran. Anyway, it's worth a read just to kind of have an idea.
I'll mention real quick. There's a passage, I can't remember where in the Hebrew Bible. I think it's in Isaiah. And this is why we have to be careful with the Kenite stuff and the other location hypothesis for Yahwistic origins, because there's a passage where Yahweh was put into Yahweh's mouth. He says something like to the effect of, the Assyrians were once my people, the Egyptians were once my people. He actually says this, something like that in the Hebrew Bible. I'm like, wait a minute. are you conflating different cultures and claiming you were their god at one time? You see my problem. So that's why the Hebrew Bible does that, where it's like, God was their God at one time. God was their God at one time.
Right.
People don't really realize that. Like, that's why we got to be very careful. And that's why I care more about the narratives, the origin of the narratives. That, to me, gives me a more likely answer than trying to play this game of Yahweh came from completely this culture or that culture. It doesn't really work like that.
Is it safe to say that you're saying it's easier to deal with narrative structures that are patterned and parallel easier than it is to take a reference, say, the sea peoples worship me and Egyptians worship me, and you're like, because I've actually heard scholars give two positions, right? Some of the theologians will say, actually, it's a romantic, it's fictional, but it's a romanticized idea that, God is everywhere. They don't realize it, but they worship me. And then other theologians say, no, they're actually worshiping Yahweh in these areas, a different version maybe, but they're worshiping Yahweh, and the biblical authors say, nah, the Egyptians.
They're both kind of right for different reasons. Number one, the Hebrew Bible says, it makes this claim, the God was their God at one time. God was their God at one time in the past. Right. Well, that's exactly right. And Ishkar is Tesha, Baal Hadad, and Adu, Adad in different cultures. Then each of those different versions of Ishkar parallels the God of the Bible differently, and it explains the major narratives at the same time. So it's kind of both. And again, that's why the Hebrew Bible is playing this little game. You can have evidence for the Canaanite theory. You can have evidence for the Egyptian theory, or any theory can have evidence like that. So that's why we got to be careful.
God calling you right now to tell you stop talking about him like that.
But anyway, that's why the Canaanite thing doesn't really cut it for me.
It may be one solution to a particular local version of Yahwism, maybe. But again, I wouldn't exclude other options.
Even if the Canaanites had a god called Yahweh, I'm not saying that they didn't. My point is, okay, even if the Canaanite Yahweh was linked to Yahweh, it still doesn't answer the question of where the narratives came from. It's more to do with the argument of the name is very similar, and there's a couple of mentions of Canaanites being linked to him in some kind of way. It still doesn't come anywhere close to the list of parallels I gave earlier, and the list is longer. It's longer because we're definitely going to have a follow-up show on this at some point in the future.
Absolutely, bro.
So anyway.
And by the way, I loved your presentation.
Thank you.
The scholarship you're bringing and the interesting stuff. It's fun stuff. I really appreciate that. Diamond Encrusted Abdullah says Allah is Baal, and also says Muhammad is an elite level Freemason.
Oh, come on. There's another conspiracy theory I heard. I don't remember where or who they claim Muhammad was. There's a ridiculous conspiracy theory that makes Muhammad formerly a bishop. A cardinal. A cardinal in the Vatican.
No, that's true. No, go ahead.
It's so absurd. And he created Islam because he got mad they didn't become Pope. I'm like, get out of here with that nonsense. And they say Muhammad is a Freemason. This is nonsense. There's no evidence of that. And there's actually Christians out there that will claim Allah is Baal. That's an old theory, but not for the reasons I do. That's a very different reason, because they're believers. They want to say Allah is a false god. He's an imitator. He's not the Christian God. That's why they're saying he's Baal, not for the reasons I say it. It's a totally different situation. Nothing to do with my research.
You're trying to do a historical critical and
this Allah is Baal because Allah can't possibly be the Christian God. That's nonsense.
Gotcha.
Nonsense.
Thank you so much for that. Philip A. Demick, thanks for the super chat. A year ago, I asked if the golden idol on Mount Sinai was Mot, given the Ugaritic Baal cycle refers to El as the great bull of heaven. Could Mount Sinai be a battle, El and Yahweh followers?
That's a very interesting question. Why not?
Some have actually argued that.
And that doesn't even contradict my theory in the slightest. Because again, but even Ishkar himself was worshipped with bulls. That's the thing we have to be careful with. El and Ishkar. Enlil and Ishkar were both worshipped with bulls. Both of them were. It's not exclusive to either one. They're both associated with bulls. I'm pretty sure.
We can get in the weeds, but Dionysus
Well,
was also
remember,
associated
Enlil
with
himself
bulls.
was worshipped with bulls in Samaria. Let me correct myself. I don't remember on that, but El definitely was. El.
Yeah.
As El, yeah, for sure. I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. Solera, night in Mammon we trust to pay for power electricity. Thank you again, man. You said it already, but thank you. Diamond Encrusted Abdullah again. Baal is Andromeda. He is an alien, aka
come on.
angel.
No. Let's.
Seems like a debate between Diamond Encrusted Abdullah and Jacob Berman.
The next thing Diamond's gonna do is quote fake cuneiform translations of text that never existed from Mesopotamia.
Diamond. Put the gloves on. Doc Pluralmanat, thank you for the super chat. Egyptian topographical lists, Ahimhotep the third, Ramesses II, mention Shasu of Yahweh in Seir. Yahweh's cult rooted in Edom, Seir, not Canaan. C.K. Vandertorn, DDD 1999.
Well, Ishkar is worshipped in all kinds of places. Again, but still doesn't refute the narrative parallels I've shown earlier.
That's why I want to just mention, I don't know what kind of case, I'm not a philologist or linguist or anything, but if Giovanni Garbini is right, he would say, look to the Mari text. We have text from 2000 BCE, well before Ahimhotep III, Ramesses II, where Yahwism is already in like Hittite and like Mesopotamian regions. So the question is, this god has traveled quite a bit according to this scholar and did not necessarily originate officially from the south. Now, maybe biblical authors are seeing a tracing of Yahwism somewhere from the south as something going on later, but the god's been all over the place is the point I think you're trying to point out. Ishkar, Mesopotamia influenced
and the
everything
Shazu
everywhere.
of Yah, the Shazu of Yah were also in Egypt. I saw that there's another comic put there. I was like, oh, bro, it's the consensus. Okay, listen, consensus is not an argument. If I believed the consensus, I'd still be thinking Paul wrote in the 40s or 50s. There are scholars now saying, once again, that Paul wrote later. So I don't believe something is true because a bunch of people believe it's true. That's not an argument. But the Shazu of Yah are also in Egypt. They also are there. That's my point. It's not just in Edom. It's the Shazu are also in Egypt.
Okay.
I've had scholars on my channel talking about the Shazu of Yah in Egypt.
Gotcha.
And so that's not a. And Set was fused with was understood to be Baal Hadad. I went through some of the scholarship on that earlier, and so that's again. Consensus this, consensus that, your way out of it as much as you want, but that's not going to explain the narrative parallels between Ishkar, the overwhelming narrative parallels between Ishkar and Yahweh. And that's the reason I brought up the scholars earlier that talk about a bit of those parallels. Different scholars addressing different, not all the parallels at once, but different parallels. The parallels are real. The question is, I suppose the debate would be, does it amount to being because Baal Hadad was renamed Yahweh or not? And the Edom thing, in my view, doesn't conflict at all with that situation. Because what I'm trying to explain is hypothetically, they could have gotten the idea to rename Baal Hadad Yahweh, not because they worship Yahweh, because they stole a name of another god and gave it to the god that they actually worship. There are actually some cases where something like that's actually happened in the ancient world, where they'll give a name of a god to another god that's not the same god. That even happened with Marduk. Marduk is an example of this. Marduk absorbs the names of Sumerian gods that he's not the same as, but they're being merged like they're the same person. You see my point?
Absolutely. And by the way, I get that is the consensus view, which we've been pointing out. I mentioned that earlier, Doc, is that we know that's consensus. I think it's interesting to check out like Garbini, what Jacob's suggesting, which is a little different than Garbini here, but it's in the vein that Yahweh was not necessarily this exclusively only coming from the south kind of deity, but rather may have been a continuation in a long tradition from Ishkar in Mesopotamia, particularly with what Jacob's saying, Ishkar Baal Hadad. And that kind of, it doesn't contradict what Garbini is actually suggesting in a sense, is that there's this continuation of what's going on here. And the interesting part Garbini is saying is, if you go to the Mari text, right, Mari and some other Syrian cities in the north, you're going to find linguistics that actually seem to indicate potentially. The only unfortunate part is I haven't looked at them myself as to see is there a narrative attached to these, but maybe the god's name is already floating around. And he argues that very point by suggesting that El says in the Baal cycle, that is north, during the Canaanite Bronze Age period, that the name of my son is Yal. And so Garbini thinks this is actually talking about Yahweh, whereas other scholars later come along and try to suggest they think it is Yam, not not Yahweh, right? So anyway, consensus definitely sides with what he's suggesting, but we also like to hunt those cutting edge scholarship to think a little bit of going, maybe it wasn't initially only in the South. And look, I'm open to all positions. I'm open to them being correct. I'm open to explanations, but I'm not going to close off when we don't have any clear absolute proof of any of it. So, that's just my little 2 cents there for what it's worth.
And I have interviewed scholars that don't agree completely with the whole Edom origin, and they suggest something different.
Or the Shasu stuff, like as if it's only originally south.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not every single scholar literally believes that. A lot of them, I guess, a lot of them do, but yes, but not all of them.
Gotcha. Wing of Shu, thanks for the super chat. Is God a modern-ish term itself? What else did many past cultures call what we just call gods? How does the many differences complicate translation?
I don't get where this is going. I mean, it's gods is a translation of Theos, which is a translation of El. I mean, what does it matter?
I think they're just, I'm trying to understand the question here. Is God a modernish term itself? What else did many past cultures call what we just call gods? How do the many, it's a little difficult for me to decipher exactly what they're asking here. Maybe the chat can help me a little, or Wing of Shu can follow up with a little more detail. I'm trying to think, what are gods, right? Typically, they're not humans, but then again, there were kings that they consider deities. But I still think the category between a king who's considered a god and an actual god in heaven has always been understood, or at least seen in written history to have been a different level of where they are and how they are playing a role. And I imagine natural, if I'm answering the question, I hope, help me out here. The reason that gods even seem to be an explanation is for the unknown, the mysterious, natural phenomena. How do we explain volcano eruption, earthquake, famine? And so these explanations usually are some kind of agency or being beyond human power that are playing a role in life, in our observations and how we explain the world around us. So I think gods come into roles like that. And of course, so do stars playing roles as gods, moon, sun, all of these things become deities or perceived that way. So I don't know if I'm answering the question here, but I feel like that's where it's at. Now, as far as the different translation, I think when everyone today just calls it God, that can confuse people, right? Jacob is, someone, they go, well, that's my God. Someone might be polytheist. They have several gods. And so, but I don't know if I'm answering this properly.
That's all right. Let's get to the next one.
Okay. I tried. Wing, I tried.
Yeah.
GD, thanks for the super chat. Traces of Yahweh and sea gods, Poseidon, Mot, etc. I find it interesting that Poseidon's trident is in the shape of Psi, the breath or soul imbued to Adam in Genesis.
Okay,
I've never heard of that.
I'm not sure what to think of that, so I don't have a comment.
Do you have any scholarly sources? I'd love to look into that a little more, or anything that if you could email me, that would be cool to see something like that. I'd be like, huh? Is someone in the ancient world recognizing some of this stuff? I like stuff like that. Thank you so much, GD. Daniel Kyle, again with the super chat. How many versions of Yahweh have merged? A god of the mountains, a god of the storm, metallurgical, a god creation, etc.
I'm going to bring a point up that another point I want to respond against via the Canaanite hypothesis, and that is, okay, and that's everything that we have to, saying it's consensus. Well, they're also admitting it's a hypothesis. They're not even sure themselves. So first off, there are scholars that thought that Yahweh is mentioned in Hittite text. There are scholars that thought Yahweh was actually mentioned in Egyptian text, if you look hard enough, because they make connections to Yahweh and Yah, the moon god, although that's not frequently suggested.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, let's pretend that I must believe the Kenite thing or I'm a heretic. Well, then we need to disregard all evidence that El is Yahweh's father. Because El is also a Canaanite deity. And it's widely understood that Yahweh was originally El's son, and El's in the Canaanite religion. El is in the Hittite religion. El is in the Hurrian religion. El is in multiple different cultures. Just like the different theories about Yahweh's origin is associated with similar names in different cultures. Just as Ishkar has different versions of himself in different cultures. That's all I have to say.
No, it's an interesting thought experiment. Do you must we suggest that Yahweh is El's son only at some point in the far distant future he decides to infiltrate, and the god who was not local, who was not a natural deity to the region of Canaan, finds his way in, disrupts the pantheon, and just so happens to usurp and become the chief ultimate deity, creator, father god, and all of that? Or was he already naturally in some form of disguise, potentially Baal Hadad, the son of El, and then he was able to usurp his father's throne, which would have been a natural genealogical shift in the religions. Like Marduk was a lesser deity, who then later ends up becoming the chief deity. So, good thought experiment of thinking like, what if, Yahweh also's in these other cultures, similar to how El is already in these other cultures.
Oh, he's saying, call it fringe if you want, but the Kenite hypothesis actually explains the data of Moses meeting Yahweh via Jethro, Exodus 18, plus Yahweh's oldest cult centers in Edom Median territory. Oh, so that's where you're going with this. That makes it easier for me to address what you're saying, actually, because there are different versions of Moses. There are different versions of Moses. You look at Hecataeus of Abdera. There's evidence of, and it's controversial, but there's evidence of Moses inscriptions in Egypt, and this was talked about a long time ago, not just recently. And the thing is, Moses could easily, the Moses that we know, the Torah, could easily be a conflation of different time periods. The Torah doesn't even say when Moses even lived. It won't even name which pharaoh it's under. The Book of Kings makes a claim that the Moses and the Exodus happened 480 years before the Solomon's temple was built. So that would put it in like 1446 BC or thereabouts. So Moses also has stories of Sargon the Great, the nativity story. Sargon being born and being floating in a basket in a river or something like that. We all know that story about Sargon and his parallels to Moses. Moses is being cultural viewpoints that form the Moses that we got easily. So that's not something that bothers me at all. That Moses that doesn't even have anything. That doesn't even have anything to do with what I'm saying, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's a little off of the super chat here, but I guess at some point, Yahweh having exclusive temples or seeming to be the primary deity, there is a shift, it seems, where the name Yahweh becomes that we have. What if we do find not just the names in ancient texts like Mari and all these other ancient texts that Giovanni Garbini's talking about, but we find actual temples that this is a god who's part of a pantheon, of course, like he claims the Baal cycle is supposedly also having Yahweh in it. What I'm saying is if Giovanni Garbini is correct that Yahweh is in the Baal cycle, what does that do with having southern temples to Yahweh, or having Yahweh as a chief deity there when he's already part of a pantheon in the north? Anyway, I think it should be taken seriously. But yeah, how many versions of Yahweh have emerged? Who knows? I think it's a constant evolution.
Yeah, and he says, and really what Doc Pleroma is also saying, if even Moses is competing versions, why panic when Yahweh does? I'm not panicking when Yahweh does. The Canaanite Midianite theory Midianite tradition isn't fringe. It's baked into one of those very versions. But that's fine, and it still doesn't contradict what I'm saying at all. There could be different versions of Yahweh, or there could have been a couple of different gods of a very similar name that are being thought of as Yahweh. It's not a big deal. It's the narratives. The narratives are being derived largely from Baal Hadad. And to me, the way I look at it is Baal Hadad is absorbing the attributes. He's being merged with those attributes in the Torah. That's the way I look at it. So maybe I came off the wrong way earlier. I don't know. But to me, it doesn't really contradict what I'm saying anyway.
Yeah, I definitely think there's competing Yahwistic
Sure,
traditions.
why not? Yeah.
Allah is Baal. Hubal is the chief god. Kaaba, Mecca. I don't know. I mean, I hear earlier someone said that maybe Baal and Allah have something.
I'm not comfortable commenting on this Hubal is Allah stuff right now. I'm not. I really have to think about that.
Okay. Avaros, thank you for the super chat. I came in at the end of this interview, so apologies. But if your argument is that Baal attributes and stories were ascribed to Yahweh, then where did name Yahweh come from, and why conflation of Yahweh with El?
No, that's an interesting and fair question. Like I said earlier, I think they wanted to give Baal Hadad a new identity to disassociate him from the Canaanite pantheon, and that's why in Hosea you have that little story about don't call me Baal anymore. You got to call me Yishi now. Yishi, my husband, not my master, my husband. So okay. And we see that Iya, which some scholars think resembles Yahweh. There are some arguments about that. And there's different possibilities. One of those possibilities could be that it could be that Yahweh was merged. Well, the name Yahweh of a different deity was merged with Baal Hadad for sake of convenience, to neutralize the authority of a separate deity, to make it easier to transform Baal Hadad into what would later become a monotheistic or originally it was henotheistic, then it becomes monotheistic later. Deity is what I'm trying to say. And it doesn't, either way, it's still Baal Hadad anyway. It's like, let me give an analogy. It might not be perfect, but you'll get where I'm coming from. Where, let's say somebody today stole someone else's social security number. Like there was actually a real case where someone stole another person's social security number and lived as him for many years. He's not the same person as him, but lived under his name. Then finally he was caught and sent to prison for that. But that's kind of how I look at Baal Hadad, where he's absorbing the characteristics of possibly a different god with a very similar name to Yahweh. Derek, it's no different than Yahweh absorbing the characteristics of his own dad, El.
Right.
It's the same thing.
But
it becomes
that's the more difficult point, right? Because if
right.
Yahweh was not already involved in the pantheon, and you
Mhm.
have to introduce him from the outside in order to explain how he then usurps his father's throne, it's easier to say, no, he may have already been part of this pantheon.
And he was Baal Hadad, and he's absorbing the characteristics of other gods, not the
Right, right.
reverse.
Yeah,
Precisely.
I mean, I don't have a time
Yeah.
machine, neither do you. We can't go back and
Right,
go,
of
yep, this
course.
is what happened. But what is easier for my mind to think is that he took the characteristics of his father, becoming the ultimate chief deity, the same way Marduk did. He was internal to the pantheon,
Right.
and then eventually usurped the very pantheon he was native to. This was part of his genealogy. He's part of the
Sure.
same family of gods, and not a foreign deity necessarily. But then again, I'm open to this. It's just, what you're saying could make sense of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think where I got off the wrong foot earlier with Doc Pleuroma is the Canaanite hypothesis is interesting to explain elements of Moses, because that's really what I think that's what that involves more of. It has to do with with Moses and the historicity of Moses, but again, that's a different situation. And and um and again, if Baal Hadad is absorbing the attributes of Yahweh of a different god with a similar name to Yahweh, or even different gods that sound like Yahweh, but it's not all the same God, that can explain that to me equally as well. Because the Moseses that are mentioned in Egypt and the Moses that's in Hecataeus, I believe, doesn't fit the Kenite situation. I I could be misremembering, but I'm pretty sure that he doesn't mention the Kenites in context of Moses. I'm talking about Hecataeus of Adira. He's got Moses leaving Egypt with a group of people and then settling into Judea, but there's no discussion of the Kenite situation. And in either way, it goes to show you that the Kenites can they can certainly get absorbed into the situation, conflated for some reason. And I can see that being the case. I'm not disputing that. I'm not even trying to say that there was no Kenite connection at all. I'm just saying I don't think that it can be used to explain the mythological stories of Yahweh, the massive ones. That's a separate situation. And maybe Doc Pleroma wasn't even maybe Doc Pleroma wasn't even trying to say that. Maybe Doc Pleroma and I can connect at some point and have a conversation if he wants to. And we can talk about it. But yeah, I do think Baal Hadad is absorbing characteristics and names and titles of other deities as he's becoming the Abrahamic deity.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
my
you.
final response to that question.
Diamond Encrusted Abdullah says Allah is Zeus.
You're just throwing random statements like that's not going to do anything, but okay.
And then Diamond Encrusted Abdullah says, pray to Zeus at Mecca, god of Saturn. Thank you so much, Kevin, for the super chat again. Thank you. If Nag Hammadi and Hamadan are Hamitic references, is it possible Yam is a composite of Yahweh and Ham, just like Romulus, Rome, Romance, Romanian are related? I would need to see a scholar who's a philologist. I'm not a linguist or a philologist, so I have no way to know if this is just English
myself. Yeah, I
because sometimes stuff in English, I've been caught thinking, is there something? It sounds similar, and they're like, no, it sounds nothing like that in the original language. It has nothing, and I'm like, oh, yeah,
that's definitely something we have to be careful with.
But it'd be interesting to see if there's any academics who like know this stuff who say, yeah, there's something there. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it. Gods are aliens. Thank you. So I thought that was you again. So anyway, any comment on that? Diamond Encrusted Abdullah?
I'll just skip that crap. Yeah.
Warlight, thank you for the super chat. How did Baal Hadad become Yahweh etymologically?
Well, I'm not arguing that his name turned into Yahweh like that. That's no. And really, and I'm going to respond to this question and Doc Florama's latest comment simultaneously. Doc Florama says Moses isn't a different situation. He's the parallel case. Both are Bricolage's textual palimpsests. That's the point. Okay. Like I said, it's it's still not going to explain where the slaying of the serpent came from, the flood myths, and all the other business, Enoch going into heaven. Like, see, that's my point. I don't think Doppler is getting where I'm coming from. Because the Medianite thing, the Kenite thing, I meant to say, can still be true, and it doesn't really have anything to do with what I'm saying. And so that's my point. Again, I think it's better Doppler and I were to have a conversation rather than going back and forth like this, because this is not going to be effective right now. But anyway, again, but Yahweh's a completely different name that was grafted over Baal Hadad. So there's not going to be an argument about a linguistic evidence of Baal Hadad turning into Yahweh.
Kind of like Baal Marduk. Baal Marduk becomes a fusion of gods, but the name Marduk has nothing to do with Baal himself. Like this particular, I know that there are many Baals, but anyway. Diamond Encrusted Abdullah, thank you again. Islam is Venus and moon worship. The moon is artificial. Aliens. Abdullah. Okay, another one.
Address that crap.
Diamond Abdullah again says, Baal created mankind. God did not. We are a slave race of Nephilim. Many children were sacrificed to him. Do not underestimate his power.
No.
This is his.
No, I don't care for this.
But it's true, Jacob. You just want to send and stuff. Clearly. Pedro, thank you so much for the super chat. Derek, hi. What is the movie name of your intro? I want to see what happens next. I apologize for the random question. That is Tombstone. So if you're looking for the movie I'm Your Huckleberry, you want to play for blood? That movie is Tombstone, one of my favorite Western movies of all time. Kurt Russell plays in it. Val Kilmer plays it. I mean, you have an excellent lineup of brilliant actors in that. And that scene is just legendary. So I figure I'll put it in my intro. That's where it comes from. Pedro, thank you so much for the super chat. I just wanted to knock all those out. Jacob, I sorry pushing through these supers, man. We got through them all. I enjoyed the presentation. It's thought-provoking, and there's a lot of scholarship pointing at interesting things. Is Ishkar, is there a continuity? Ishkar. Continuity, right? Between Ishkar down into Yahwism. And is it purely just Yahweh absorbs all these attributes, or Yahweh is kind of continuing something that really has been going on from ancient Mesopotamia onward? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, you see with the Hittites, you talk about Kumarbi and all these various deities in their pantheon. Mm-hmm. You see it with Mesopotamia, all of these mythologies. And then we get to Canaan. According to Giovanni, he thinks Yahweh is being mentioned. Others don't.
Sure.
And then people say, no, this God just comes in. And this is the $1 million question. Even when I interview, or if not, I haven't interviewed yet, but I've read the articles and have spoken on the phone with, what is his name? Nisam Amzalog, who has the metallurgical explanation that Yahweh was a metallurgical deity from the south, and that he, through trade, through metal objects, and this gets into alchemy and ancient kind of, melting of metals, was like a human who could do that and create objects out of melting metals was seen as someone with magical abilities. That Yahwism, he believes, started in the south and moved all the way into the Aegean through trade. And he thinks that at some point during the Iron Age, Israel needed these metals, and they were very influential. So this cult infiltrated, and that's how he explains how Yahweh became supremely worshipped in this region. But is Yahweh an outsider that infiltrates and then usurps this pantheon? And how common? This is another interesting question. How common would a foreign deity that is not local to the land come into a land and then become the chief deity of that entire pantheon, absorb like a leech or suck like a vampire all of the powers away from all the deities, then exclude every single deity that existed in the pantheon to be the only one? Like, I don't know how common that would be. Is it more likely he's natural there, or he came from the outside? I don't know.
Well, again, now that kind of contradicts the Yah theory about canon, because in fact, I just remembered there's a couple of scholars. I think there's a couple of scholars. I could be misremembering, but I think there's a couple of scholars that actually argue that Yahweh is Yam, literally.
Really?
Yes, but it's not a well-known argument. But
Okay.
it's like, well, Yahweh is a sea god. You see, Yam's a sea god, and that's the thing. So like that would conflict with metallurgy theory. I've heard of the metallurgy theory before. It's interesting, but it doesn't explain the bulk of where these myths came from. And that's really the point I was making earlier. Is like, let's say the whole Canaanite theory is true, exactly the way that's presented. And there's a Yahweh over there, and the Moses tradition is tied there much more strongly. Okay, but the issue is that still doesn't explain why the major narratives came in from Baal Hadad. So let me say this: how would we know that Baal Hadad, the worshippers of Baal Hadad, didn't? Let's just say this. I'm not saying I believe this, but let's pretend this happened. What if Baal Hadad's worshippers, or the Jews that worship Baal Hadad, stole the identity of the Yahweh of the Kenites and gave Baal Hadad that name, which would explain all which would incorporate the Kenite theory with the larger mythology of Yahweh coming from Baal Hadad? It could easily have happened that way. Again, I used the identity theft analogy earlier. Stealing someone's social security number analogy. It's, in a way, I do think something like that probably happened, because Yahweh is it's a very different name, and there are arguments from scholars about Yahweh's resembling Ea, kind of giving Yahweh possibly a Hittite origin. It's again, I'm probably not expressing all of this completely accurately, but these kind of theories do exist. And Doc Florma said, apologies, I sounded more like a reviewer, #2, than a chat participant. Should have engaged his strengths before hammering the gaps. My nature, but it's okay. That's fine.
Yeah, just so you know, Doc is an OG MythVision, been in the chat.
Yeah.
Really, really good questions. Very supportive of what we're doing and critical. And we need that. And so I'm glad people are going, man,
that's fine.
There's something going on. I do like the metallurgical explanation. The metallurgy part does help explain anomalies in the Exodus narrative, with Aaron melting down the gold and creating a calf, and there are elements about it that you can see and go, whoa. But like you said, there's mythic narratives that go, so there, I feel like there's just so much coming in from possibly various sources. And Nisa Mamzalog, who speaks a completely different language, I think French, told me I need to translate his book using AI into English, but he's like, Derek, on the phone, he has very broken English. It's hard to understand. He's like, you really need to look in Egypt. You need to look at my new book. I found and identified so much with Yahweh, even with like some of the metallurgical gods of these other places. Like, I believe I pulled up a list here just so I'm, Ta, right? And Khnum from Egypt. There's Kother Wahasis or Hawath.
I was just about to mention that. Yep.
Yeah, he's a skillful and wise god in the Canaanite religion, patron of artisans, builders, and smithing. And what's interesting, I asked just to see if there's anything to this. There are possible echoes to Kothar in Exodus 31, where Bazalel and Oholiab, butchering the names, Bazalel is filled with the Spirit of God in wisdom, Chachma, understanding, and knowledge, to build the tabernacle. That threefold formula, skillful and wisdom, is strikingly close to Kother Wahasis' title. So there's some stuff that we got to keep digging into, Jacob. And I think you and I are going to have to keep revisiting this stuff.
Kofar built the weapons of the gods. He also built Baal's thunderbolt, by the way. Baal Hadad's thunderbolt, according to the Canaanite text. He's basically the same god as Hephaestus, Vulcan,
Right.
And the equivalent of the Hindu deity Vishvakarma, who also built the weapons of the gods like Indra's, Vajra, Vishnu's weapon. I forgot Vishnu's weapon. Shiva's Trishula, stuff like that.
GD, it's just addressing you, thinking he's crazy.
I don't remember you.
No. They super chatted.
Oh, okay. Well,
Maybe.
I didn't say. I don't think I was trying to say it was crazy earlier. I mean, but it's, or if he might have been talking about another time, because I have been asked this. I believe I've been asked this question before years ago. So I don't know. It's in Tubal Cain's also, by the way, mentioned in the whole metallurgy context by some. That somebody in the chat just now brought it up.
Yep.
But and Tubal Cain is a biblical character for in the Hebrew Bible for all that. Why did that clarification?
Got it.
But yeah, it's interesting. Again, Yam is he does sound a little like Yahweh, and like I was saying earlier, I'm completely fine with Baal Hadad being given the identity of the name of another god. It doesn't contradict my conclusion. Again, my argument is that regardless, I don't care where the name Yahweh came from. The Canaanite theory could be true. The Egyptian theory could be true. It doesn't really matter to me. Any of them could be true, and still totally, and I think perfectly fit the Baal Hadad situation. It explains the concentrated, strong parallels to Baal Hadad, one way or another. But I've said that several times in this stream by now.
People have sacrificed children to Baal for thousands of years. You liar.
Yeah, I know where this is going. I don't lie. This is there is a lot of nonsense about Baal right now on the internet. It's I don't care for it.
Okay, Cameron Boutley, forgive me. Why do you think the story switched from the opposer archetype, creating, teaching, saving, to Yahweh El? It's usually Ea, Okeanos, Amiriana, Poseidon, or a serpent telling truth about fruits, no?
I don't understand.
Yeah, Cameron,
I don't understand where this is going.
Cameron, you got our attention. So if you can follow up and give a little more detail in comments so that I understand as well what you're actually suggesting, I'm paying attention. So, Cameron, please do that. I'll get to the next one. GD, thanks for the super chat. Any traces of Yahweh in the kingdom of Dilmun? Inzak was apparently worshipped at Falika Island. Any connections to Canaanite pantheon? Huh.
It's an interesting question. I'm not aware of any evidence of this, so I can't comment one way or the other. That's all I can say.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd like to look at that and see something like, I know Samuel Noah Kramer talks about a lot about these connections to Dilmun. I'm wondering if he has anything to say. Yeah, what does he have to say about Canaanite pantheon to Dilmun? That's something I'd like to know. Or is Dilmun's mythology like 2 and 3 layers earlier by the time the Canaanite myths are on the scene?
I think I just about covered it.
I just wanted to make sure we didn't leave our buddy here, Cameron, hanging.
No, he didn't put any more comments. I've been looking at the chat. So
okay. Look, I really appreciate your time coming on here and putting this together.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I love hanging out with you, man. You're doing big things. Shameless plug to you and the hard work you've done for many years now. Tell us what are some of the things that you have that you're working on right now, just so people know. And I'm going to post your link to my chat so they go subscribe.
Appreciate it. I am working on a paper articulating the new chronology for Paul's epistles, the dating of Paul's letters in the 80-90s for Bob's Journal of Higher Criticism. That's still in the works. On October 20th, I have a debate going down. I'm going to be moderating a debate between Dr. Frank Hughes and Dr. Jack Bull. Which version of Paul came first? The canonical Paul, or did Marcion's Paul come first? So Frank and Jack will be debating live on my show on October 20th.
Who is it?
Frank Hughes and Jack Bull. Dr. Frank Hughes and Dr. Jack Bull.
What are they? Hold on. What's the topic? I'm sorry. I was looking at the chat. And
which version of Paul came first? Marcion's or canonical?
The showdown.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Who are you rooting for? You can't tell us. You're moderating, right?
I am moderating.
Yeah, you're just going to be a neutral moderator. I know you're good at that.
It's going to be on October 20th. It will be live. If you click that arrow button to the right,
okay,
you should click it again.
There
you go.
Okay.
Right there.
It's going down, dude. So are they punching each other? Are they bringing guns to the fight?
No, of course not. But
Jack, he's awesome, man.
Yeah.
I spoke to him earlier today. Yeah, good guy.
Yeah.
Real good guy.
Yeah, same here. I spoke to him earlier too.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad to see scholars are getting in the fray and having professional debates where they're respectful and
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, hold on. Did any chat people understand my question? Cameron popped in.
No, we did not.
I don't get it, Cameron. I'm sorry. I really, really don't. Again, switched from the opposer. Are we talking about Genesis? I'm trying to understand teaching saving to Yahweh El. I don't. It's hard to understand what's being asked here. So I'm sorry if that. I'm sorry. Really, if you want to email me, please do so I can understand. They'll give you plenty of room to explain what you meant, and I can call up Jacob and tell him. And maybe in our follow-up episode, you can pop it and say, "Hey, I asked that question," and maybe we'll better explain. Or email. I'll just email you back. Either way. We got one more that popped in here. Perhaps Delmunite influence came in via Tyre. Herodotus, among others, believe the founders of Tyre were from Telos, modern-day Bahrain. Interesting. I didn't know that.
It's interesting.
Yeah. What else you got cooking up here, Jacob? I want people to go subscribe to you.
Well, David Mercer and John K. Winford will be debating on my channel if Jesus survived the crucifixion. That's also going to be live.
Is that over here somewhere?
And of course, I'm debating Kevin Maxwell on the 21st.
Kevin Maxwell. Yeah, good guy though. Good guy. What are y'all debating?
Yeah, it's right there, September 30th.
Yeah.
Go back.
Oh.
September 30th is right next to Jack and Frank's debate. There it is.
Oh, that's the survive one, and then yours is here.
That's right.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. You got some big things coming, man. Big things coming. I know we're live on your channel as well, but I want to thank you for coming on to MythVision and hanging out with me. I think we should do this more often. You and I, we work hard, but we also like to have fun and, throw ideas at the wall just to stick stuff out there and constantly change our mind as we view the evidence and go from there. So anything you'd like to say, have at it before we close.
No, I think I've said what I had to say.
I understand, man. Look, we did have one more pop in. Esmil says Yah appears in Mesopotamian Dilmun, but no divine determinative for a god to differentiate God from human. I didn't know that either. I need to keep studying. Esmil, thank you for pointing that out. Now I know I need to look into this and see if we can't find something that does have that God dinger determinative, because that is something I remember. I don't know if it's from the Mari text. It's really, really old stuff.
Right.
But he does mention the dinger in relation to the name. Okay, here it is. The reluctance to accept the presence of Yahweh outside Israel is unexpectedly transformed into enthusiasm in the face of the information provided by the Ebla tablets or text. The premature and rash announcement that in some text, the theophoric names containing Yah have this last element preceded by the divine determinative, dinger. That divine dinger has provoked in some scholars a kind of triumphalistic exaltation under the banner Yahweh equals Hebrews. And so we can see an attempt at the Hebraization of Syria in the 3rd millennium BC, with poor Abraham unexpectedly moved back 700 years towards prehistory. So if we want to draw any conclusion from the extra biblical evidence relating to Yahweh, we can state that the texts show a divine figure worshipped in the region of Syria and Palestine from the beginning of the 2nd millennium BC on, both by sedentary people and by nomads. A divine figure connected with the local pantheon, but in no way preeminent. A divine figure, in short, the form of whose name fluctuates remarkably. Yah, Yahweh. With this information, the historian immediately faces a problem. How, when, and where did this pre-Israelite God come to be accepted as the national Hebrew God? It is quite impossible today to give an answer to even one of these questions, given the present state of the evidence and our knowledge of the earliest Hebrew history and any kind of... Yeah.
Sorry if I interrupted you, but
no,
have you seen... You see how these different theories about Yahweh's origin, about a God that sounds like Yah, and no more information seems to go with it? You see my point? It's super vague. It dates to a certain period.
Mm-hmm.
It may explain some details, sure. Maybe something in the Exodus, or something over here, something over there. But it's very small. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you're talking about the myths, the stories.
Yeah, I'm talking about the big stuff. The stuff that I think matter more.
At least it's easier to connect, right? Because you have more data. Okay.
Right. And
now, are you going off? I'm curious. Are you going off screen, right? Like pretend we're on camera and then you're going off screen and you got a straw in your, and then you're coming back on camera just now? Totally kidding. Totally kidding. Anyway.
It's
like me going.
Well, if you want to know, it's because I'm itching a little bit there, and that's
I'm kidding. Why. You're being respectful. You know.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah.
I'm teasing you. I'm having a little fun. Please.
That's what's going on.
Me and Jacob are buddies, so don't feel.
But you got a vague Yahweh. Like, okay, you got a little something. It sounds like Yahweh. Sure, great.
And it might be right. It might be connected, but you can't make a strong case like you're doing.
That's what I'm trying to say. It's
okay.
You don't really get the causality to be explained. It's like, okay, does a God that happens to have a name that's similar to Yahweh, but somewhat similar? Because people argue, actually, that doesn't sound, because that's where this is going to go is you'll have different scholars that will say, that sounds like Yahweh. Like, yeah, it sounds like it, but it's not him. You have different arguments as a mess, and they'll spend hours talking about a name sounding like something.
Yeah, the name doesn't really do much. I get it.
That's my point. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, thanks, Asmil. And then one more handsome cat came in. You are a handsome cat. Look at that profile picture. Thank you so much. You should host a debate between Jay Dyer and Justin of Deconstruction Zone. Maybe include Planet Peterson and Jim Bob too. Precept versus atheist debate. That'd be a fun debate. I mean, that'd be cool. It's just I get super kind of like annoyed by precept stuff. I could just suppose any deity matches. And in fact, you can make a stronger case, in my opinion, of just tracing some of the oldest gods that predate the God you're particularly making the case for, right? And I would just say, if I could show that your God and the narratives about him is borrowing from these earlier ones, there's a good case to be made that the one before that, if you want to grant all of their claims, the one before that actually best fits the reason, logic makes sense, and the world is something we can actually make sense of. So it's just one of those things that I get irritated of listening to. It's like, God knows, because technically Muslim presuppositionalists could come in and just do the same thing you're doing. And it's like, man, I'd rather arguments from like history or textual arguments and things like that, philosophical, but not these word games.
Muslim apologists, they'll try to argue stuff like they'll try to find something in the Quran and try to look at another culture and say, you see, they knew that detail hundreds of years, thousands of years with the Quran. It's validating our faith. And they'll do stuff like that. And be really anachronistic to try to prove the Quran. It's ridiculous.
Look, I'm buddies with Justin, and I'm buddies with. Yeah. I'm connected to most of these guys. Jay's the only person I'm not connected with. But I could reach out and see about putting some war together, some absolute skirmish. See what happens. Jacob, love you, man. Before another super chat comes in, because we'll be here all day.
Oh yeah, we'll be here forever.
Seriously, let's do this again, and let's do it again sometime soon, man. I enjoy your company, and I know that my audience
back at you. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks
all right,
for having
ladies.
me, Derek.
Yep. Subscribe to Jacob Berman's YouTube channel, History Value. He's doing big stuff over there. Excellent scholarship, and also never forget, we are MythVision.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.